my loves. And now I'm going to be reading a bedtime story. I got my pajamas on. Do you have your pajamas on? And did you brush your teeth? All right. So this is called George Brown Class Clown Super Burp. And it's by Nancy Krulik. Chapter 1. And this is a letter. Yo, George, never thought I'd say this, but I think it stinks that you won't be going to our school anymore. Now, I'll be the only one in class 4A, telling jokes, and my jokes always sounded better next to yours. At least at your new school, you can be the funny guy, your pal Kadeem. George lay on his bed and stared at Kadeem's page in the Goodbye George book the kids at his old school had made for him. All the fourth graders had written something, but Kadeem's page, and let me show you that page. See? But Kadeem's page was the one that made George the saddest and the maddest. Sad because now he had no friends to tell jokes to, and mad because Kadeem made it sound like his jokes were funnier than George's. And that wasn't true. No way. George reread what Kevin, his best friend, had written. At least Kevin used to be George's best friend. Could you stay best friends with someone far away? Here's the letter. George, I was just thinking about the time in third grade when you put the fake spider on Mrs. Dirkman's chair in the cafeteria. I never heard anyone scream so loud. I laughed so loud milk came out of my nose. Boy, will I miss you. Kevin. P.S. Here's a photo so you don't forget what I look like. There's the page. George started to laugh. No one was more afraid of bugs than mean Mrs. Jerkman. That what George had always called his strict third grade teacher, at least behind her back. Freaking her out was always fun. George turned the page in his book. The next note was from Suzanne Locke. George, goodbye, Suzanne. Even seeing that cheered George up. Suzanne hadn't wanted to write anything. Her teacher had made her do it. Not that George blamed Suzanne. It wasn't like they ever been friends or anything. But the note on the page next to Suzanne's was from one of George's really good friends. Dear George, I'm really going to miss you. You made me laugh a lot. I think you're really brave. I'd be scared to move to a new town, but you don't seem scared at all. I know you will have a lot of friends in Beaver Brook. Your friend, Katie Kazoo. P.S. Thanks for the way cool nickname. George thought Katie's last name, Carew, sounded like kazoo, and the nickname had stuck. Katie was a really good friend, and she was pretty smart, but she was wrong about George. He was scared to be living in a new town and started in a new school day. George had a lot of practice being the new kid. His dad was in the army and his family moved around a lot, but it was never easy. After spending 2 whole years in Sherrydale, he had almost started feeling like an old kid. Then bam, here he was in Beaver Brook. George, it's 800 hours. Gotta get a move on front and center. His dad's deep voice echoed through the halls of the new house. Let me do that again. George, it's 800 hours. Gotta get a move on front and center. That's better. It was a lot bigger than their old house. Even with all their furniture, it felt empty. In fact, the long upstairs hallway would be great for skateboarding, except his mom never let him skateboard in the house. George grabbed his backpack and headed downstairs. For a second, he thought about sliding down a banister. Then he stopped himself. That was something the old George would do. Now, besides being the new kid, he wanted to be a new George. And the new George didn't do dumb stuff like that. Dumb stuff that got him into trouble. The last time George slid down the banister was at his old school. He flipped over the side of the staircase and wound up with a black eye and a bloody nose. And not just a regular bloody nose, a super colossal bloody nose. The kind that turns your nose into a blood fountain. The school nurse said she'd never seen anything like it. It had been sort of gross, but sort of cool too. Got everything, honey? George's mom asked as he reached the bottom of the stairs. Pencils, notebooks, lunch? Check, and check, George said. That shirt looks really nice, his mother told him. Thanks, George said. His new green t-shirt had a picture of a blob on the middle of it. It was really cool. The perfect day of school shirt. I know somebody who likes green. Okay, soldier, said his dad. Ready to march? Yes, sir, George answered. He saluted his dad. His dad saluted back and then gave him a big bear hug. Then let's go, George's dad said. As George headed to his new school, he thought about Cherrydale Elementary School. Not to brag, but everybody there liked him. He was famous for being the funny kid, the class clown. Of course, pranks almost got him into more trouble than anyone. It seemed to George that he spent as much time in the principal's office as he had in class. But that wasn't going to happen in Beaverbrook. No more class clown. George was turning over a new leaf. He was through with getting in trouble. He was going to act differently from now on. So differently, in fact, that he decided to start school with a new last name. His dad's last name was Brenham, and that was the last name George had used all his life. There was nothing wrong with that name, but from now on, George was using his mom's last name, Brown. New name, new George. George Brown, he murmured, quietly under his breath. George Brown. What did you say? His dad asked him. I was trying out my new name, George explained. Oh, George's dad replied. You're okay about this, aren't you, Dad? George asked his father. Sure. Only his dad didn't sound so sure. I guess it just take a little getting used to. But I understand wanting to change things up. Look at me. I've traveled all over with the army. New people, new places, lots of changes. At least this dad doesn't care what last name he uses. That was true. His dad's job was the reason the family was always moving. It was why George always seemed to be the new kid. But we're going to stay at this house for a while, George's dad continued. At least I hope so. Your mom is really excited about opening her new store. I don't think she wants to pack up and move again. Yeah, I guess, George said. Having a dad in the army was cool, but having a mom who owned a knitwit, a shop that sold yarn, knitting needles, and beads was, well, not so much. George kept up with his dad's long strides, trying to ignore the nervous feeling in his stomach. His mom called it having butterflies in your belly, but that wasn't what it felt like. It was more like worms. Big, long, slimy worms slithering around inside. They turned a corner. There it was. George stopped and stared at his new school. It was a red brick building with a flagpole in front. Over the door it said Edith B. Sugarman Elementary School. Except for the name, it looked pretty much like all the other schools George had gone to. Edith B. Sugarman, George wondered. Is that somebody famous? His dad shrugged. Never heard of her, but the name doesn't really matter. Your new school has a fine reputation. George didn't agree at all. Names did matter. A lot. And no one knew that better than George Brown. And that's it for tonight, guys. All right. I love you. Sweet dreams. Until tomorrow night.